How's it going, Jerry?
Today, hey, good morning. How are you?
Good morning to you. I'm doing well. This is Jerry Griffin, who is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing of InMed Pharmaceuticals, ticker INM. I appreciate you hanging out with us today, Jerry.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Jerry, I got a lot of stuff to ask you, but before we get into the nitty gritty things, I'd love for you to explain it to me like I'm five. What is it that your company does?
Yeah, I guess good place to start would probably be just talk about the InMed business first and foremost. InMed is our parent company. They're a NASDAQ listed pharmaceutical drug development company. As you mentioned, the ticker is INM. What's really unique about InMed is they do nothing but pharmaceutical drug development focused on rare cannabinoids. Now, cannabinoids are compounds that are typically found in the cannabis sativa plant. They've got a lot of health and wellness value. And InMed focuses entirely on all their drug development with rare cannabinoids as the focal point. Now, they've got three programs currently, three drug development programs. One is the epidermolysis bullosa program, which is currently in stage 2 or phase 2 clinicals. And I think we're the only company that has a rare cannabinoid at that stage in the FDA drug development process. The second program is our glaucoma program, which is a preclinical program. And the third is our neurodegenerative program, which is kind of early days, but the focus there is on really horrible neurodegenerative diseases like ALS and Huntington's and things of that manner. Now, Baymedica is InMed's commercial ingredients company. We focus entirely on the manufacturing and sale of rare cannabinoids into the health and wellness markets. And what's really interesting about us is we do all of our manufacturing outside the plant. So we don't use any plants in our processes. We use things like chemical synthesis or biosynthesis, which is kind of a fancy name for fermentation. And what we do is we identify compounds that have high health and wellness value and are impractical to produce from the plant or otherwise represented in very small amounts in the plant. And we make those in a what we call a bioidentical manner. So they're molecularly identical to what the plant makes. What's probably worth noting, which is very unique about this duo of companies, is that if you're a company like InMed, you would typically, of their size, that you would typically go out for outside capital. And you would hit milestones and you'd raise more capital, you hit milestones, raise more capital, until eventually you are in a place where it's pretty clear you're going to get to an FDA approval. Very, very infrequently are these types of companies self-funded. And Baymedica provides an opportunity for InMed to partially self-fund itself. And then if myself and my team does their job well, in the near future, we could be fully funded through the Baymedica business. And just to kind of put a bow on it, typically, the cannabinoids that we produce today, one is called cannabichromene. It's kind of our flagship product. Cannabichromene is what's responsible for a majority of our revenue and free cash flow. And then we've got three others rather that we launched in the last year: THCV, CBDV, CBT, all of which have really interesting use cases, but they're just kind of finding their footing in the market. And we'll see if they can do for us what CBC has done for us thus far.
Yeah. So when it comes to CBC, when it comes to CBDV and other, things that you've mentioned, how would that help the average viewer in their everyday lives? Like, what are the benefits of that, would you say? Because that's like the biggest misconception that I find. And it's, I understand you may not be into the nitty gritty things, but that's the biggest thing where I feel like folks are misunderstanding of like, hey, what is it? What are the benefits? Why does one take it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so, I would say that one of the contributing factors to our, more recent success has been this critical mass of consumer education. It's very difficult for me to sit here and give you a summary of all the primary research that's been done on all these compounds and the different use cases. And in fact, I'd probably be running afoul of the FDA if I did do that.
Let's not do that.
But there is a ton of literature out there. There is a ton of information that any consumer could look into themselves to get a feel for why they may want to buy a product that has CBC in it or CBDV in it.
Can you explain a little bit about your biosynthesis process, and especially if any of the tech or how much of the tech is and proprietary to you, and that, it kind of gives you the edge over, say, your competitors?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, at a very high level, we've got some IP moats around, a lot of our processes, whether it be our ChemSynth processes or our biosynthesis processes. Biosynthesis specifically is just a fancy way of saying fermentation, right? In the same way that, brewers' yeast can produce alcohol by feeding it sugar, what we aim to do is um, genetically modify an organism. In our case, a lot of it's yeast derived. Yeast is the microorganism. And we train that organism to create a cannabinoid versus create alcohol or whatever other whatever else that microorganism would typically excrete given the input material. So it's really just a very high tech version of creating alcohol via fermentation.
Yeah. Now, look, I kind of want to go over your revenues, if I may. So you posted about a 46 revenue increase in quarter over quarter. I'm curious as to what you believe was the reason for that jump, but more importantly, for the viewers that are watching, if you believe this will continue and what you're expecting moving forward.
Yeah, so as I alluded to a minute ago, the biggest driver, in my estimation, around our recent success, you touched on the Q1 to Q2 revenue increase of 46%. It's really this critical mass of consumer education. We've been out there beating the drum on the health and wellness values of the compounds we make. Then you have some very large players with much larger voices than ours launching products and talking about their excitement around rare cannabinoids. Now, as an example, Kronos, who you may be familiar with, seems to be having a lot of success with a CBC product in Canada. And the US companies are starting to really kind of track that success and follow suit. They've been very vocal about their success with this and specifically around rare cannabinoids. Lastly, I think one of the contributing factors is kind of a personal theory, but rare cannabinoids provide for a relatively inexpensive way to innovate in what's right now a very cash constrained environment, right? 98% of the capital that was flowing into the space not too long ago has pretty much dried up. And it's very difficult to take a new form factor from conception all the way through product development and all the way to retail, whereas rare cannabinoids give you an opportunity to really just reformulate and rebuild the products that you currently have to address a different use case or to create a different effect. So those are kind of the contributing factors. You touched on, our trajectory or what's next. Was that the second part of your question?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I would start with 2022, right? 2022 was kind of a building year for us. Mm-hmm. We had to make sure that we could scale production and that we could operationally digest the opportunity that we felt that our go-to-market strategy would allow for. We had to build a sales funnel, which is no small feat. It's a pretty heavy lift. And that required a lot of travel, a lot of trade shows, a lot of in-market activity, a lot of relationship building across the value chain. And we also needed to do our best with a very small voice to normalize this concept of bioidentical cannabinoids to a market that was built around an agricultural crop that people are very passionate about. So they kind of viewed what we did as unsavory for one reason or another, maybe too disruptive, maybe, scary, like it's going to put them out of business, which we're none of those things, right? We actually view ourselves as just, contributing to the supply chain of cannabinoids where the plant just isn't the right method, right? It's, the plant is a very good factory for making a lot of different cannabinoids, but the cannabinoids that we produce are very impractical to pull from the plant. And so, from our perch above this entire cannabinoid value chain, if you will, things are absolutely accelerating. We can see all the activity across the segment. We can see what's going on with contract manufacturers, product developers, what's going on at retail. And I don't think that anybody would be surprised. Anybody that's similarly situated to us in the space, that's also a cannabinoid ingredient manufacturer, if we saw triple-digit growth going forward, if not certainly high double-digit growth in the very near term.
Yeah. And one thing that I wanted to touch on is, we talked about, or actually you kind of mentioned how folks may not be familiar with the products that y'all have. And especially when it comes to cannabis items, things like that, some folks can get a little iffy about it. But have you seen any change in the demographic of folks that use your product and your services and what y'all are doing, especially companies or individuals that may have been like opposed to it in the past?
Well, let's start with the companies that we would be opposed to it in the past, right? I've been in and around cannabinoids since 2017, right? And I've been specifically in the kind of biotech play on cannabinoids for the last 3 years. And when I first started pitching this concept of bioidentical, biosynthesis derived, chemical synthesis derived cannabinoids to the market, everybody was kind of like, all the brands, right? We're a B2B company, so we're dealing directly only with businesses, but they were all kind of like, yuck, right? I want nothing to do with that, right? We're all plant all day, and that's what we do. And over time, you kind of continue to rinse, wash, repeat the pitch, and they start to realize, the gears start to catch, and the light bulb starts to go off, where they're like, okay, if I want to produce products at scale, precisely, batch after batch after batch, which is really what you need to do if you're a CPG company, which is what all these products eventually will become. You can't have variability that the plant provides for with certain cannabinoids like the ones that we make, right? Like I said, the plant makes some cannabinoids very, very well. CBD, it does very, very well, right? CBG, as in growth, does very, very well. But when it comes to what we do, you're not going to be able to have that consistency, that reliability of supply chain, that batch to batch consistency that you would from the plant that you would get with our products. So the market has really started to embrace this. And we've got no shortage of, very large, well-known brands that are incorporating our ingredients into their products.
Yeah.
So in terms of demographics, I would say that remains to be seen, right? We lean into Headset and the other, business intelligence types of companies that track products in the space. And then hopefully eventually, we'll be leaning into the more CPG focused business intelligence companies once the, big CPG companies start to get off the sidelines around this. But we don't have a lot of insight into the demos. We just have a lot of insight into the cannabinoids that are selling and what form factors and potentially what, if we research those further, what are the use cases that they're targeting, right?
Yeah.
But certainly I think anybody that is paying attention would say that, this transcends demographic, right? Cannabinoids have use cases for all people everywhere. No matter what it is that they're having, issues with or what they're trying to get under control. And so I think it kind of does transcend demographics. And you're starting to see that stigma go away, and you're starting to see, everybody participate.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And one last question for me before I turn the floor over to you is, how would kind of like a full legislation, especially on the federal side of things, change your industry, and how could it benefit you and your parent company as well?
Sure. So right now, we have concerns about really getting overcorrected out of the market. And what I mean by that is that you've got, for example, these adult use hemp cannabinoids, right? These things like Delta-8 and HHC, which regulators kind of view as potentially harmful, non-compliant, or both. And they may be right. In a lot of cases, these molecules are synthetic. And so a really easy, cleanup of this would be, let's just ban all synthetics. Now, I don't see that happening at federal level, but I certainly see it, in local jurisdictions.
Of course.
And we would get mopped up in that, which would be a shame because, the way we view it, a molecule is a molecule. It doesn't matter if it comes from a plant. It doesn't matter if it comes from modern manufacturing processes like what we do. And to take it a step further, let's look at citric acid, right? Or let's look at aspirin, right? Salicylic acid, another word for aspirin. Maybe this stuff at one point in time came from citric or from citrus trees or from orange peels or from willow trees, right?
Yeah.
But now that's not the case. It's all synthetic. And it all comes from biosynthesis or chemical synthesis. And if you were to eliminate synthetics in those supply chains, the global demand would never be able to be met. In fact, nobody would have access to these ingredients, and they wouldn't get the benefit of these really, really useful ingredients. So, on that front, we're comfortable that the regulators will get this right. But it's certainly a challenge and a concern. Now, if you look at this federally, the best thing that could happen would be for the FDA to step forward and create a regulatory framework that we all could plot our paths forward around, right? And that hasn't happened. So they've punted to Congress and then said that, we're not able to really properly regulate this stuff. And a lot of their focus is around CBD because that's the one that's, so prevalent. But, and we don't know how that's going to play out. But if you could just put forth some regulatory clarity, some sort of framework that we all could build our businesses around, the floodgates would open. Big CPG companies who, kind of are very risk averse, right? They're sitting on the sidelines waiting for us to all this to play out. They're very interested in getting involved. They want to get involved, right? They see the value of these molecules, but they can't because they just can't plot their path forward in a pragmatic, responsible way. So that would be the best thing that could happen, right? Then there's, of course, federal cannabis regulation, which, it's a whole other, conversation, a whole other, beast. But certainly that would help the business as well.
Yeah, that last point this is the one that's the most interesting for me, especially because, there are companies and individuals, investors that are on the sidelines saying, hey, love this technology, love what it can do, but we've got the blocker called the federal government, the state government, and all the, laws and bylaws we have to go through. But, we've talked about a lot of things. I know you've got some things in the pipeline, phase 2, some in preclinical. But is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, any topics you wanted to discuss that I didn't get a chance to ask you? The floor is yours to talk to our viewers.
No, I mean, I'd kind of ask you a question, actually, if you don't mind, right?
Please.
We closed yesterday, I think at, $1.56 a share, thereabouts, right? So our market cap is, somewhere in the $5 million range, right? We've got $11.5 million in the bank to continue to build value around, not to mention, the 46% growth that you mentioned last quarter. I mean, what is your perspective on a stock like that? I mean, from where I sit, it's a no-brainer, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. So for me, and again, just so, for the folks at home, just so, you have laws and things like that, I've got to go ahead and talk about mine as well. For me, this is my personal opinion, not Benzinga's or anything like that. The biggest thing for me when it comes to companies such as yours who have things, I believe you say you have something in phase 2 and you've got the glaucoma thing in preclinical as well. And you mentioned some other thing that was early on stages. For me, the biggest thing is kind of looking at the competitors and seeing, hey, where are they in this type of space, in these type of studies, trying to solve these type of problems? And I'd be lying if I've said I've done the due diligence in the competitors and things like that. But as always, it's always about risk management, right? So something that I would look at, and the folks at home can look at it, maybe you can comment, is in terms of what your financials look like, right? So it's like, hey, are you going to have a secondary offering or anything like that to protect what you may be trying to do in the future and what you're going to do with that money and things like that? You mentioned something about how you were already kind of self-funded a little bit, right, with your parent company and things like that. So that's definitely good to hear. So for me, it's one of those things where it's a good company to start their search on, right, and then kind of see what you guys are doing, where you're going. The fact that you have a parent company and then look at the laws and the states that you're in, that would definitely make me feel a little bit more comfortable. And those are the parameters and the outlines that I would go about in terms of researching what InMed is and what it's going to do in the future as well. The 46% quarter over quarter, that's absolutely impressive. No question about it. But it's like, cool, I don't get paid for what happened in the past. I get paid for what's going to happen in the future, right? So that's where I would try to create a projection based on where it's going to go. And of course, risk capital, right? I mean, this isn't like a blue chip, so it's tough to kind of put it in your 401k, but I definitely think it's something that's worth for the viewers at home to do their own due diligence based on the answers you've given here today to see what's best for their portfolio.
Yeah, appreciate this, Sinead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jerry. And that is Jerry Griffin, who's the Vice President of Sales and Pharmaceuticals at InMed Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, thanks for the time, Sinead.